I often talk about liquidity being the number one most important thing to consider before opening any options trade. You need to make sure that you're actually trading in a liquid underlying product. So you want liquidity in the underlying stock that you're trading, and then the options themselves also need to have some liquidity. There needs to be some actual volume, some trading going on those options that you're considering trading. So today I wanted to briefly discuss option volume as well as option open interest. So volume and open interest are two different metrics that can give you some idea of the liquidity of that option that you're considering trading. So let's talk about option volume. Option volume is the amount of options being exchanged between buyers and sellers. If you're familiar with checking stock volume, option volume is very similar. If I go to my trading platform, which I'm using TASTYTRADE as my trading platform, if I go to any particular ticker symbol, so AMZN, which is Amazon, I could get how many shares of stock have traded today. I could go take a look at the stock volume. You can see volume right here. 31.3 million shares of Amazon have traded thus far today. The markets are open, so this number may change, but that is the stock volume. Now, I can also get the daily volume of each individual option that I may want to trade. I could go into the options chain, and you can see one of the columns here I have set to volume. And for example, if I want to see how many of the 180 calls have traded today, I can see that 846 contracts of the 180 calls have traded today. If I wanted to see how many of the 180 puts have traded today, I can see 1,760 contracts of the 180 puts have traded today. And both with stock volume and option volume, this is a daily calculation. So what happens is for every option seller, there is an option buyer. The combination of this two-sided activity creates a transaction, of course, and that transaction of the simultaneous buying and selling, because there's always a counterparty to each and every options trade, that counts toward the daily option volume. So option volume starts at 0 every day and only increases throughout the day. So each and every time somebody buys or sells an option, gets counted toward that volume. So the number starts at 0 pre-market. If you go into the options chain, if I go into my trading platform, all these numbers that are real numbers right now, if I would have been here pre-market before the stock market actually opened, because before the stock market opens, you can't trade options on these stocks. So obviously volume is 0 every day. It resets to 0 every day, and throughout the day, as people buy and sell options, then this number increases. It never decreases. It can't go down. The number can never go down. It can never go negative either. So that is volume. Volume is pretty straightforward to understand because it's very similar, again, to when you're checking stock volume, for example. Let's talk about open interest, because open interest is rather unique. Open interest is the number of contracts outstanding on a strike that have not been exercised, expired, or closed. So what this means is when somebody opens a position, it gets counted toward open interest. And until they close that position, that still gets counted toward open interest. It doesn't reset to 0 like volume does, right? So it's always the number of contracts outstanding on that particular strike. So open interest is a rather unique metric. It really only applies to derivative products. So when we're talking derivative products, we're talking options and futures. So products that derive their prices from some underlying asset, underlying stock, underlying commodity. So options and futures are what we call derivative products, and open interest is a metric for those kinds of products, because you can't really have open interest on a stock, because a stock has shares, and the number of shares that are out there is a set number, where open interest really applies to things like options and futures, which don't have a set number of contracts. There's no limit to the number of contracts that can trade. So the way open interest works is open interest, it increases when sellers or buyers open a new position. So when you buy or sell a position to open a position, that gets counted to open interest. Open interest decreases when that seller or buyer closes that position. So again, it's a little different than volume. And if you want to see this in action, I can go into the option chain here for Amazon, and instead of volume, I could set this column to open interest, and you can see the numbers here for Amazon. These are very large numbers. You can see tens of thousands of contracts at some of these strikes. So this is the open interest. This is the amount of options positions that have been opened and not closed yet. So what happens here is if there is a greater option volume that's marked to open rather than to close, open interest will increase. If there is greater option volume marked to close rather than to open, then open interest decreases. So one very important thing to note here is that open interest does not change during the day. The number stays the same throughout the day. Open interest actually changes, it's updated on each trading day. So tomorrow I will see a different open interest on these strikes. So as of the end of the trading day yesterday, the open interest on this 180 call here was 11,500 contracts, right? That number is going to be different tomorrow based on what people are trading today. That number could increase, it could decrease. Who knows? Now, as far as which one of these should you track, should you look at volume or should you look at open interest? Well, for me, I typically like to look at open interest more than volume, but both of them give you a pretty good idea as to how liquid the options of a particular stock are. In this case, you can see with Amazon, based on open interest, this is a very liquid underlying, but there are some things you need to consider. You need to be careful when you're analyzing open interest, because sometimes you'll open up an options chain and some strikes are going to have a very high open interest, and then other strikes will have a zero open interest. Why is that? Well, this is likely due to some strikes being older than other strikes, because what happens is the exchanges, they add new strikes every so often. And because some of the strikes are older, more people have had the opportunity to trade those strikes. So naturally, open interest is going to be much higher on the strikes that have been around longer than the newer strikes. I can actually show you this in action. If I go back to the trading platform here, in this 57-day cycle that I was in before for Amazon, you can see that the strikes are $5 wide strikes, right? So every $5 you have a strike. But if I go into some of the closer in expirations, they have added closer in strikes, maybe dollar wide strikes, maybe $2.50 wide strikes. If I go into this 15-day cycle, yeah, here is one that you can see they just added new strikes. Instead of the $5 wide strikes, now we also have the new strikes at $2.50 wide. And you can see these are brand new. They probably just added these, because if we look at open interest, if I look at open interest on the 185 call here, you can see 6,700 contracts, right? The open interest on that call. But what's the open interest on the 187.5? Well, it's zero. What's the open interest on that 182.5? It's zero. And, if you didn't know that these strikes were just added today, you would swear that, something really weird is going on. But again, it's open interest. Open interest will change tomorrow. So these strikes will see some trading today, and tomorrow you will actually get real numbers, non-zero numbers on these strikes. So that is just something to keep in mind with open interest is, as these options get closer to expiration, a lot of times the exchanges will all of a sudden add new expirations. If I go to the 22-day cycle, it's still $5 wide, except for, oddly enough, we've got one $2.50 wide strike. Why is only one there? Well, that was probably a special strike. That one strike they added, probably because they had a big institutional player that wanted to purchase a sizable position at the 157.5 mark, and they asked the exchange to add that particular strike. So sometimes you'll even get one weird strike that just seems like it doesn't make sense at all. Just know that especially the big players in the game, they can request the options exchange to add strikes, and sometimes they'll grant that request. Also note that new strikes are also added when the underlying stock trades through the highest or trades below the lowest strike available. So what this means is, if we go to the options chain here in Amazon again, let's go to the 57-day cycle, the highest option strike is 300. But what if tomorrow, all of a sudden, for whatever news event happens, Amazon suddenly trades above 300? Well, we're going to need some more strikes. So what's going to happen is the options exchange, they're going to now add brand new strikes above the 300 mark, probably all the way up to 400, 500, maybe even 600 strikes, right? And then, of course, those new strikes, those brand new strikes, again, have no open interest yet, right? Because they're brand new strikes. So just know that, anytime a stock makes a big move where it blows through all of the available strikes in either direction, they're going to go ahead and add new strikes to allow people to still trade that underlying. And earlier I mentioned that the exchange will sometimes add new strikes based on a request. And in the past, just regular traders, people like you and me, could request the CBOE, which is the Chicago Board Options Exchange. You could request them to add strikes. And they used to do this, and sometimes they would actually add strikes based on some regular Joe Blow like you and me asking them to do this. But I guess it got to the point where too many people were trying to request strikes, so they no longer allowed this. Now the only people that can actually request the CBOE to add strikes to an options change are brokers. So your broker is allowed to make such a request, and if you ask your broker, they might make such a request on your behalf, but there's no guarantee that the CBOE is going to honor the request, but there's no harm in trying. So there you have it, a very quick look at options volume and open interest. Now, which one should you actually be paying attention to? Should you look at volume or should you look at open interest? Well, I think you should look at either one or possibly both, but I think you definitely need to pick at least one and have a column for, in my case, open interest, or if you prefer volume instead, either one. They give you, again, a quick look, a quick way to gauge the liquidity of some of these products you're trading. And if you want to learn more about option volume and open interest, as well as a wide variety of other topics about options, check out my book, The Super Wheel Option Strategy. It mainly focuses on my favorite option strategy, which is the wheel strategy, but it's a great beginner book, especially if you're new to options trading. I cover a lot of basic information, including volume, open interest, as well as the various option Greeks. You'll find a link to the book in the description below. Peace, guys.